Good morning. Sorry for the delay. So, today we are going to talk about Terrian theory in modern science. So, we have always discussed about germ theory, and the modern medical people have always been following germ theory of diseases, and because of which they have been able to treat most of the cases so far. So, and Terrian theory, which was found by Antonio Beckham, has always been a wonder because people of science, they were not able to understand this thing. So, because of that, Terrian theory was largely neglected, by the modern medical people. So, today when I was studying about life and aging and health, so that's when I came across this study on mTOR, and then when I expanded this research and saw that it fits in so perfectly for the Terrian theory. So, it has always been discussed what makes you sick, and the best person to ask what makes a person sick is Hippocrates, because all the doctors, they take Hippocrates' oath, and he is the father of modern medicine. So, when we ask Hippocrates, he says that it is more important to know what sort of person has a disease than to know what sort of disease a person has. So, here he has already given the importance to person. Which person has a disease is more important than disease that a person has. So, if you see the nomenclature here only, we see that Hippocrates has guided us to the reality right from the day one, and he said that you need to know about the person. So, based on this, people started explaining the various causes of diseases, and it has always been a wonder even today that there are many diseases that don't have cause, and when you don't have a cause, how can a disease manifest? So, that kind of thought has always troubled the modern medical doctors. So, based on this Hippocrates guidance that it is the sort of person you need to find out, Antonio Beckham, he actually proposed the Terrian theory of diseases, where he explained that it is the human who, when becomes sick, creates a diseases. So, he says that germ seek their natural habitat, that is in diseased tissue, rather than being the cause of diseased tissue. So, he was the one who propagated Terrian theory and formulated the principles of Terrian theory, where he said that it is the person individual health which goes down, thereby causing fermentation, thereby causing germs to grow in them, and that only complicates the disease rather than forming the disease. So, when Louis Pasteur accidentally came across bacteria in his microscope, so he was very happy that it is this bacteria that is causing disease. Later, it is said that Louis Pasteur himself accepted the fact that Terrian is everything, germ is nothing. So, we really don't know what exactly is this, but after his invention and after his accidental finding about bacteria, accidental finding about antibiotics, accidentally finding about vaccinosis, that this theory became hugely accepted. And here Beckham, he says that in a human has something called as microzyma, and this microzyma is at the beginning and at end of all organization. So he said that is microzyma that is important, and that is the microzyma that creates illness in the body. So he said that microzyma is the fundamental anatomical element whereby the cells, the tissues, the organs and the whole of an organism is constituted. So people have translated microzyma as DNA. So you can take it as DNA, but I really don't know, like, can we take it as DNA, because DNA fits with the description of microzyma. But conversion of microzyma into various forms, as he explains, which gives rise to diseases, all kinds of diseases, that is where we need to understand the mechanism of this. And that is where, when we see that, David Sabatini, he came across this mTOR, and he said that mTOR kinase is the key to answering one of the central questions in biology, and that is the question of how a person grows, how an organism grows, and what exactly happens to the organism. And I picked up this beautiful sentence or found thing about David Sabatini, and I explained and I went into the depths of mTOR. He is the one who actually explained it, and I propose that mTOR pathway is the one through which we can explain the Terrian theory of diseases, and it fits in perfectly. I will show you how. So let's continue. So David Sabatini says that mTOR is an evolutionary conserved nutrient sensing protein kinase that regulates growth and metabolism in all eukaryotic cells. So it is mTOR, which is a protein kinase that regulates growth, metabolism. So if it is regulating growth and metabolism, definitely it regulates disease also, right? And then he further says that mTOR, which translates as mammalian target of rapamycin, mTOR signaling pathway integrates both intracellular and extracellular signals and serves as a central regulator of cell metabolism, growth, proliferation and survival. And what is disease? Disease is thus the opposite of metabolism, growth, proliferation and survival. So this finding was so important that mTOR signaling pathway, it's the central regulator of everything. So let's delve into more details about mTOR. So we know Terrian theory. We know that there is the basic Terrian of a human which goes bad or ill, and that's so I propose that Terrian is formed by mTOR. And what is mTOR and how does it affect in health? Let's see. So now what is health? So WHO has its own definition, which says that it is mental, spiritual and also physical well-being. Hardly we see this definition being applicable in today's modern person, healthy person. It's not there. So I took up this old definition of health, which says that health is a biological balance between catabolism. And what is catabolism? Catabolism is breaking down the organism, and anabolism, which is building up the organism. So health is a biological balance between catabolism and anabolism. During catabolism, what happens? The body switches into a state of cell survival, repair and autophagy, that is removal of damaged proteins and cells. During anabolism, the body switches to cell growth and replication mode. And defining health as an oscillating balance between catabolic and anabolic state lets us pursue specific strengths that strengthen our terrain, because that is what is important. So, here I show you this, that body tissue and body energy is a balance between anabolism, that is cell growth and replication, and catabolism, that is cell survival, repair and autophagy. Okay. So, the same thing we see in the figure below, that is the figure of energy balance. So, you have a catabolic state, anabolic state, where which leads to a lower catabolic state, it leads to what? Lower catabolic state leads to weight loss, because anabolic states are high. So, this is another definition that I propose, which it is there. Now, let us see about this. So, this body intelligence is what I propose, that physiology depends on body's intelligence, and body's intelligence is what it does. What does our body intelligence does is it does digestion, it does the functioning, it does the maintenance. So, if you put anabolism, catabolism and the balance between is functioning, and the anabolism and catabolism, why they do occur in human body is because anabolism and catabolism is there so that the human body functions, or the organism functions. So, that functionality can be voluntary, involuntary, all those functionings. So, I propose that body intelligence gives 40% of its strength to functioning. Even a person who is in coma is still functioning, right? Because all the involuntary functions, they are still occurring. The heart is beating, the blood is running through the blood vessels. All that functioning is still occurring, even though there is no intake, but whether the maintenance is in full, that is what has to be known. So, like if you take a state of coma in the form of deep sleep, so I would say that is the state of maintenance, where the body starts maintaining the health. So, anabolism is digestion, catabolism is maintenance and functionality, and this anabolism and catabolism is occurring because the body has to function, and this functioning is both voluntary and involuntary. So, now what happens if a person eats more, then the body intelligence will give more energy here, will give more energy to digestion, and the energy of maintenance will suffer, because the functionality is not going to suffer at all. So, if the state of anabolism increases, so there will be increased digestion, and that increased digestion will translate into fat, will translate into obesity, will translate into stagnation. And if we are in the state of stagnation, the functioning will as usual be there, but the maintenance suffers. So, if we fast, then what actually happens? The body's energy is directed towards maintenance. So, I will tell this in more scientific terms with mTOR's definition. This is the same thing that actually occurs. This is the imbalance of anabolism and catabolism. So, when you eat too much carbs, it gives rise to blood sugars. Blood sugar increases the insulin, and that insulin will cause storage of fat, and because insulin is high, it increases the hunger, and this vicious cycle goes on and on and on. If this vicious cycle is going on, the body is not able to go into a catabolic states, and then you fall ill. And not only the diseases that are infective in nature can be explained through this, even the diseases that are non-infective, lifestyle disorders, can be explained through this. Now, let us see what is mTOR. As I told, mTOR is mammalian or mechanistic target of rapamycin. Rapamycin was discovered by the germ theory people, right? So, rapamycin is nothing but antibiotic. So, it was discovered, and they didn't know how it acts, and it was David Sabatini who with his research found that mTOR is the core component of differently composed signaling complexes. It is the main component. And what does it do? It is responsible for cell growth, it is responsible for cell size, it is responsible for organ shape, and it is responsible for body plan. So, that is what it says, that it is the functional unit of all the eukaryotic cells. So, if mTOR is in optimum health, if it is functioning, it is signaling optimally, you will have optimal cell growth, you will have optimal cell size, you will have optimal cell organ shape, and you will have optimal body plan. The person is healthy, he is able to do all his activities without any difficulty, right. So, now we will look on into this, and also I will say that mTOR is not just in humans, it has been found from the singular from the yeast till the end, and there are two pathways. I will just explain you in detail. I hope you are I am trying to simplify it, though it is very difficult, but still I am trying to do it. Now, this is what target of rapamycin does. So, when I tell target of rapamycin, so I am removing the M, because this is what actually happens in every eukaryotic multicellular organisms. It is not just in humans. So, target of rapamycin has two units, target of rapamycin unit 1 and target of rapamycin unit 2, or it is called as target of rapamycin complex 1 and target of rapamycin complex 2. Now, what does TORC1 does? It senses the nutrients, that is amino acids, growth factors, and the energy level and the oxygen, and then with the optimal factors, optimum oxygen, optimum nutrients, optimum growth factors, optimum energetic level, it causes translation from the DNA to the cell, and it brings about cell growth. The complete cell cycle is under the control of TORC1. So, it analyzes the cell, it forms the cell, it multiplies the cell, and it forms the whole organ. So, this is under the sensing of the nutrients and the growth factors, and it is through this sensing it also governs the metabolism. So, it senses how much has to be how much expenditure, it senses how much nutrients a person is taking, and all these senses bring about a balance between metabolism, the anabolic and catabolic states. So, the cell is formed optimally, the organs are formed optimally, and the functioning is optimal under the TORC1. The TORC2, the target of rapamycin 2, it differs in a different, it is mainly the cytoskeleton, it forms the cell membrane, and it senses mostly the growth factors, and there is some research which says that still TORC2 is not completely studied, but it also is the one which actually controls metabolism as well as the cell structure, the cell membrane. Okay. So, irrespective of which cell, every cell has this. It is just not restricted to one. Muscles have it, adipose tissue have it, and connective tissue have it, and all the other organs, they have this whole things. So, if there is stress, then the mTOR goes into upregulation. So, it starts withholding all the nutrients and converts them to save the day. And if there is less, if the mTOR senses that there are less nutrients, the low levels, low energy level, then it brings about autophagy. So, whatever the cells are there, it remains, it keeps them in a healthy state, and whatever the malformed cells are there, which are aged cells are there, it starts metabolizing or absorbing them. So, under the nutrients and the growth factors, the TORC senses whether the cell cycle has to go into for or against. If it is against, it causes autophagy or programmed cell death. So, this TORC complexes is upstream. So, same thing I am telling, So, target of rapamycin complex 1 supports anabolism linked reaction pathways. Energy equivalence and molecular building blocks within the cell stimulates TOC1 activity, and by stimulation it promotes cellular growth. Sorry. Fasting or cellular stress, namely the lack of enough resources, block TORC1, and TORC1 is inhibited by tuberous sclerosis complex, which is a genetic factor. Okay. TORC2 complex functions mainly in the organization of cytoskeleton. So, TORC2 is mainly regulated by insulin and PIK3 signaling pathway. TOX2 signaling can be inhibited via TORC1 and via insulin and insulin like growth factor receptor signaling. So, this TORC1 is also controlling TORC2. So, if the TORC1 is healthy, even the TORC2 is healthy, and both these are under the tuberous sclerosis complex gene. So, TSC1 and TSC2 genes. So, that is why when this gene is lagging, you see that in those kids, in those people, tumors are formed all over their body, brain and all the other places. Now, this is the pathway, how it actually works. It senses the amino acids arginine and leucine, okay, and then it forms GATOR, and this GATOR along with the regulator protein combines with TORC, and this TORC senses energy stress, damage of DNA. It also senses the oxygen levels, and from this senses it creates the cell. It forms the cell, and it is also it is like it is always for it just does the for. So, that is why it is like a naughty child, and this naughty child is held by collar by TSC. Otherwise, this TOR goes on multiplying cells and keeps the cells growing. So, that is why it has to be inhibited by TSC. So, TOC2 complex is under the control of insulin and endodermal growth factor, and this also is controlled by TORC1, and this forms the cell skeleton. So, I am just trying to show you how this works. So, you need not remember all these things. What you have to remember is this part, that TOC1 promotes cell growth and TOC2 is in the organization of cytoskeleton. Now, here comes my hypothesis to explain the Terrian theory. We survive because real immunity is woven into our creation. It is encoded into the DNA of every cell of our body, right? We know that. So, Antonio Pickham, he says that the primary cause of disease. So, now here is where the mTOR comes. So, mTOR, what it does, if it is activated in tumor formation, all kinds of cancer, it causes tumor formation and angiogenesis, it causes insulin resistance, it causes adipogenesis, diabetes and epilepsy. So, this was a paper which shows that mTOR is emerging as a critical regulator of immune function because of its role in sensing and integrating cues from the immune microenvironment. It senses the microenvironmental changes that occurs, the cytokine levels, the inflammatory markers, all its changes, and then it causes T lymphocyte activation. So, you see it explains everything. It explains the infective disorders, it explains the non-infective disorders, it explains the inflammation, it explains the ulceration, it explains the cancer genesis. It also explains the lifestyle disorder, because if mTOR is deregulated, if mTOR is in a wrong sense of well-being, then it causes tumors, it causes insulin resistance, and it also causes type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes can't be explained by germ theory. Can it be? Even cancer can't be explained. But we know that if there is a cancer, but the bacteria can form in that and complicate it. So, now these are the mTOR functions in normal things, in how it does in the experiment, like I say. So, mTOR functions, what it does, it in liver, it suppresses the ketogenesis and the release of glucose. So, these mTOR functions are increase in muscle power. So, there is muscle hypertrophy, there is adipogenesis, adipose cell differentiation, and in pancreas there is beta cell growth and proliferation. So, these are the normal functions of mTOR in liver. So, this is just one experiment which was done, and this is what we found, that through liver the muscles, they come into optimum health. So, it suppresses the ketogenesis and gluconeogenesis. Okay. Now, if there is a chronic mTOR inhibition, what it does? It reduces the size of the liver. So, there is hepatic steatosis, that is the fatty liver. There is increase in ketogenesis, and that translates into muscular atrophy. And if there is chronic activation, there is defective ketogenesis and insulin resistance, and that causes atrophy and this. So, and insulin resistance indirectly affects mTOR again, and if it is affecting mTOR again, then the T lymphocyte activation will also be affected. If T lymphocyte activation is affected, what will happen to the immunity? The immunity will be all the time low. So, if there is any super infection, I won't call it that simple infection. If there is any super infection, like we have the corona infection, if there is super infection and that there is disturbed T lymphocyte activation, it is not able to activate properly, but all the inflammatory markers get activated. Then what actually happens is body goes into a state of disharmony, and that causes cell death. That causes terminal disease where he is not able to come out of it. So, my conclusion is very simple, that Terrian emphasizes on the internal environment, immunity, homeostasis and cellular changes. The cellular pathology leads to change in its integrity, the integrity of the internal environment, thereby forming environments favorable to fermentation and pathogen production. This holds true with the advent of modern scientific research, where pleomorphism, the cells which keep changing, and the mTOR signaling plays a central role in disease development. The germ theory can't explain the modern medical The germ theory can't explain modern day lifestyle disorders, but Terrian theory fits in perfectly. If Terrian is in fermented state, if it is in a bad state, if mTOR is not in harmony, then what actually happens is the cells are malformed, and that provide an environment for superinfection. And once superinfection happens, then there is nothing but death. So, I hope that